Run them jewels fast, run them jewels fast, run them jewels fast, run them jewels fast,
Welcome to the Week 7 weekend edition of the Sharp Football Analysis Podcast. My name is Warren Sharp of sharpfootballanalysis.com. We've got a great podcast in store for you guys as you're listening to this on Saturday. It is in the early morning hours of Saturday that I'm recording this. We just finished up the phone call with Evan Silva, breaking down every single key matchup that you're going to be interested in, whether it's from a daily fantasy perspective or a sports betting perspective, as we weigh in on a lot of these games. Just the matchups and the way we think these games are going to flow. A lot of good information, a lot of analytics and statistics that we give to you guys out on this podcast. So stay tuned for that. It's a big dive into these games. So a lot of information here. Obviously, you can tell by the length of this podcast, we're going to be running through a lot of useful information. Hopefully, you'll be able to listen to this at your leisure during the day on Saturday into Saturday night as you start getting your lineups filled out and finalizing which games you're going to bet on. But prior to doing that, let's do something we forgot to do. We didn't get a chance to do basically with regard to the time constraints last week, and that is we are not going to skip this moving forward. The NFLproject.com information as it relates to the machine learning computer algorithm and its predictions for the rest of the season based on where we are right now, as well as every single game that's going to be played out, how these teams are going to stand by the end of the season after playing through their entire rest of their schedule. A lot of great information here that we're going to be getting into in a minute. Got a lot of feedback that they missed out on that last week, and they really enjoyed that early primer before we start digging into these games. So with that said, if you are a subscriber to this podcast on iTunes and you want to catch some of these graphics that I'm going to be throwing into this presentation, it will be on YouTube. You can go to the description of this podcast in iTunes, and there's a hyperlink. You'll be able to click that hyperlink. It'll take you right to the web page where you can easily view some of these various graphics that we're utilizing as we walk through it. But we'll be as descriptive as possible, so you won't really be missing anything if you don't do that. But if you are a subscriber on YouTube, of course, you'll be able to see all this right there. I highly encourage you guys, become a subscriber of the podcast. We do a early podcast in the week, a Tuesday morning podcast breaking down all the games that were from the prior week, and then we look in the podcast here on the weekend edition where we break down all the games that will be. So hopefully you guys are subscribing, hopefully you guys are enjoying this podcast. Feel free to share it with your friends and others, because we really put a lot of effort into this, try to give you a lot of cutting edge information, insight that is the basis of a lot of our research, a lot of our hours into it. Obviously you can tell it's late Friday night into Saturday morning, and this is the latest and greatest information that we've got. There's not going to be many other podcasts that are going to come out that are going to be more recent and helpful to you on Saturday than this one right here, as we broke down all the injuries that are available to us. So hope this is a help. Let's dive right into the NFLproject.com information. Alright guys, this first graphic from NFLproject.com shows us the true odds to make the playoffs for every single team in the NFL. We can clearly see that the Green Bay Packers and the New England Patriots are sure locks almost to make the playoffs. Basically over 80% likely to land the number one seed are the Packers, and over 66% likely to land the number one seed in the AFC are the New England Patriots. You can easily see some teams don't really stand a shot at any other seed but the one that they're slotted for. For example, the Indianapolis Colts look like they're destined to be the number 4 seed in the AFC, and the New York Jets look like they're destined to be a wild card seed in the AFC as well. Clearly, if the Jets are able to upset the Patriots this weekend, that would be a big change to the model, but Right now the model is projecting that the New England Patriots will come away with the victory. You can see off to the right the true odds to win the divisions, and clearly most of these divisions are pretty much one-sided affairs. The only divisions that really have some very interesting matchups include the NFC East, where the Eagles right now are projected to win 45% of the time, followed by the New York Giants at 29% and the Dallas Cowboys at right around 20%. And over in the NFC South, you have the Carolina Panthers and the Atlanta Falcons, both right around 50%. So that division right now is viewed as a toss-up. Right now it looks like the Carolina Panthers are going to take it by virtue of their victory in Seattle, coupled with the loss of the Atlanta Falcons to the New Orleans Saints last week. So that really helped out the Carolina Panthers in this projection. We'll see what happens after this week's games. Looking at the next slide, this is the one where we're going to look at the odds improvement from last week till the games that we just saw this upcoming week, and we see that the Carolina Panthers are the team that really improved their playoff chances the most, obviously with that big, massive win in Seattle. And naturally Seattle fell tremendously in terms of their chances of making the postseason, having suffered that loss. But Carolina Panthers really improved tremendously, and that is coupled kind of with the fact that the Atlanta Falcons lost to the New Orleans Saints. So the Carolina Panthers gained some ground based on the Falcons' loss and based on their own win. So it was a great week for the Carolina Panthers. Philadelphia Eagles were able to take care of business against the New York Giants, and that's bigger than it seems. Obviously, they were supposed to win that game. They were favored to win that game. However, had they lost that game on the short favorite line, then the Giants would have been really in clear control of that division. So that was big for them to get back to 3-3 and even with the Giants in that division. The Pittsburgh Steelers, obviously they were home dogs, not supposed to beat the Arizona Cardinals. They were able to do so and win. That really helped them out a lot. Didn't hurt Arizona nearly as much because Arizona is so far off in their division that they're in really good shape even still. But for the Pittsburgh Steelers, it was very big because they're chasing the Cincinnati Bengals right now in the AFC North and looking for potentially a wild card spot. So that was a big victory for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So with that said, what do we look like for the playoff picture moving forward? Well, that's up in this next graphic here. We can see that the NFC is still the Green Bay Packers. They got the number one seed overall. They're going to be looking at probably a bye and home field advantage throughout the postseason. However, the Carolina Panthers have moved up. Previously, they were looking at a wild card spot with the Atlanta Falcons holding down that number 2 seed, but that is now flip-flopped, obviously, with the Panthers winning in that upset fashion in Seattle, the Falcons losing to the New Orleans Saints. Now those two positions flipped, so now the Carolina Panthers are looking at the home field advantage up until at least the championship game as the number 2 seed and a bye, whereas the Atlanta Falcons would be going on the road to the Eagles in the first round. The Eagles and the Giants, they basically flip-flop positions there. The Eagles were not projected to make the playoffs the last time this model was run, but they certainly are now. And the Giants are in the 6th seed. So the Arizona Cardinals would be hosting the Giants in the first wild card game, having won the NFC West, and the Philadelphia Eagles, having won the NFC East, would be hosting the Atlanta Falcons. Over in the AFC, that division has not changed very much whatsoever since the last time this model was run. New England Patriots and the Cincinnati Bengals, the two teams that are looking to hold down the number 1 and number 2 seeds with the home field advantage in the first round buys. Then the Broncos at number 3, and they would be hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers. And at number 4, we would have the AFC South champs, the Indianapolis Colts, hosting the Jets. The only thing that was different from the last time this model was run is that the Bills fell out of the playoffs. They were the number 6 seed. In came the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are getting some wins with some backup quarterbacks, and they really needed it. So that's really helping them out a lot. So they currently look like they might be destined, if the season continues to play out in the manner that the NFLproject.com predicts it will, as the number 6 seed. But that takes us right into this next graphic. And with this next graphic, we look at the true playoff odds of improving with a win in this upcoming Week 7 games or decreasing with a loss. And by far, the biggest game of the weekend is the Dallas Cowboys-New York Giants game for the NFC East. Both teams stand to gain approximately 14% if they are able to win this game. The Giants would drop by about 16% with a loss in terms of their odds to make the playoffs. The Cowboys would drop by about 13% with a loss. So the Giants move down further. However, if the Cowboys lose this game, they drop down to 16% likely to make the playoffs. If the Giants lose it, they drop down to 25% because they're at a higher percentage right now. They're at 41% to make the playoffs right now. Cowboys are only at 29%, and the Giants are currently slated to take a wild card spot in the playoffs right now, the 6th seed. So a win obviously would be big for the Cowboys and drop the Giants down a little bit. A loss would really separate the Giants from the Cowboys a bit more in that division. A win by the Philadelphia Eagles over the Carolina Panthers would be the third biggest help for any team this week in terms of odds to make the playoffs. They are 55% right now. They would move up to 68% if they're able to go into Carolina on Sunday night and pull off the upset. In terms of a couple other teams that would really stand a lot to gain, the New York Jets, obviously, if they are able to pull off that huge upset over the New England Patriots, they would move up to 88% likely to make the playoffs, virtually locking down one of those wild card spots with a 5-1 record, plus some wins in versus the AFC competition. And the New Orleans Saints, they're a team that are now only at 11% likely to make the playoffs, but they would definitely increase by approximately 8% up to 19% to make the playoffs if they're able to pull off a victory in Indianapolis as an underdog. In terms of teams that would stand the most to lose, I already talked about those two teams from the NFC East. A loss for the Steelers would definitely hurt them. Even though they're on the road in Kansas City, a loss there would drop them down to 57% likely to make the playoffs. The Minnesota Vikings, similarly a team that would stand a lot to lose, as would the Arizona Cardinals. Minnesota is actually a road favorite in Detroit currently, it's about 2.5 points depending on where you're shopping. Some spots are down to 1.5. And the Arizona Cardinals, they're a home favorite this week, a big home favorite on Monday Night Football against the Baltimore Ravens. If they somehow lose that game, they would drop down to 69%. So that's a good look at some of these teams and what they could stand to lose or gain. Obviously, pay close attention to the NFC East here in the late games on Sunday afternoon and then the night game with Philadelphia and Carolina. A lot to be decided in that division that is very closely contested right now. All right, guys, let's race right into this next segment, the segment you've been eagerly anticipating all week, where we sit down with Evan Silva. We go down through every single one of these key games, break down all the matchups that you guys need to be aware of, all the key values that we think that is on the board, whether it's from a daily fantasy perspective, a fantasy football perspective, or from a sports betting perspective. Every single angle is covered here. A lot of analytics, a lot of metrics, and a lot of great information, injury-related information, and otherwise. So highly encourage you guys, kick back, enjoy it. You got all day on Saturday to process it and utilize it so that you can help set some really good lineups for yourselves, as well as place whatever bets that you want to make on these games on Sunday. Do not forget, bright and early Sunday morning, you don't want to miss it, 9:30 a.m. Grab your cup of coffee on the East Coast. If you're on the West Coast, roll out of bed extra early. Great matchup, some of the best quarterbacking that you'll see in the NFL all season long over in London. When E.J. Manuel takes on Blake Bortles, you do not want to miss that. With that said, I do want to mention that, unfortunately, the introduction to Evan's segment here got a little bit truncated and cut off, so I had to deal with some audio issues there. So we did exchange pleasantries. We did announce that his Twitter handle is at Evan Silva. You can find him at rotoworld.com. You can get his matchups article, which is posted there every single week. Just go to rotoworld.com, search for matchups. He does one on, I think it's a Tuesday or Wednesday, that previews the Thursday night game, and then on Thursday evening publishes in-depth article that goes through every single game on Sunday with all the stats and metrics that you guys need to know for the Sunday games from a fantasy football perspective. So you can find all of that at RotoWorld. He is at Evan Silva. Let's jump right into the analysis of the Monday night game with him. All right, so let's get started here with the Monday night game. We've got the Baltimore Ravens traveling back out west to face the Arizona Cardinals. Arizona, obviously off of a tough loss, trying to get right at home against a pretty mediocre to poor defense in the Baltimore Ravens. Baltimore just played San Francisco, was contemplating staying out west. That's what their plan was before the season. Decided It didn't work out well last time they tried to do that earlier this year, so they're going to fly back east. They're flying back out to Arizona. So a lot of travel for the Baltimore Ravens. What's your take on this matchup?
I think it's a blowout spot for the Cardinals. If you kind of look at it from an Ace Rothstein, style gambling perspective, the Cardinals coming off a really frustrating loss out east are going back home to face a team that is traveling, across the country, playing at night in Arizona. I don't like the way that the Ravens offense matches up with the Cardinals D, because the Cardinals will be able to stick Patrick Peterson on Steve Smith, and then the Ravens don't have a whole lot else. They can try to run it, but how are the Ravens even going to be able to stick with the run, because Carson Palmer is going to be shredding their pass defense. So it's a game that matches up so poorly for the Ravens, and things don't always go the way that they're supposed to or the way that we expect them to, and we know that. But as we're analyzing this game, I have a really tough time, having any expectations that even the Ravens will be competitive. I think the Cardinals are going to smash them, and I even like the Cardinals' fantasy defense this week. I mean, we've seen Joe Flacco have bad games before, really bad games, and I think that might be what happens on Monday night.
Well, here's a couple of interesting tidbits on this particular matchup. If you look at the defense and what Arizona brings to the table to go up against the Ravens, and then you look at what Arizona is going to try to do against this Baltimore Ravens defense. Look at the Ravens and look at who they have played that actually likes to throw the ball and is a good passing offense. Their last couple of games, San Francisco, well, we know all about Colin Kaepernick. Cleveland Browns, well, we know all about Josh McCown. The Pittsburgh Steelers with Vic, yeah, we kind of know what Vic is. He's not even starting this week. Now, whether that's from the hamstring, they would have started Landry Jones, who knows, but it doesn't matter at this point. They played the Raiders, who put up 37 against them, and they played the Broncos, but we know the Broncos, Peyton Manning is not playing the way that he has been playing. The only two teams that really can throw the ball a little bit that they've played were the Raiders, who put up 37, and the Cincinnati Bengals, who put up 28 in Baltimore. And remember, Andy Dalton that game was 11.6 yards per attempt. He went 20 of 32 for 11.6 yards per attempt, 121 passer rating in that game. That was a game the Bengals could not run the football on the Ravens defense. They ran for 2.8 yards per carry, but they were throwing the ball left and right all over this defense, 3 touchdown passes from Andy Dalton in a place that he's usually struggled. And now Carson Palmer gets this team at home. And partially, I'll be interested to hear your take on this, but I definitely did think that Carson Palmer was working the ball a little bit aggressively to Michael Floyd last week. And I don't know if potentially that screwed some things up inside the red zone, inside the goal-to-go zone, because Carson Palmer's passer rating down there was not very good inside that goal-to-go zone. So it was a difficult situation for them putting up points late, but it was very efficient the rest of the time, up and down the field, 414 passing yards. So if you're looking for a blowout, are you at all concerned that you think the Cardinals' offensive players might be not getting enough work and that more might follow the run game, or do you think that they're getting that blowout because they're going to be passing the football early and often?
I think that last week was just kind of an outlier game, and you're right, when Michael Floyd had 3 red zone targets, and one of them worked, and 2 of them didn't, and 2 of them came really close. Like, he was really close to having 3 touchdown games, but that's just, that can happen in a game. And you're right. I mean, they hit chunk plays in the passing game, mostly to John Brown, and they moved the ball up and down the field, and, when they got in scoring position, they didn't execute. And one of the statistics that we cited last week was that you cited was how good the Cardinals had been in the red zone up until that point. So it just seems like an outlier game to me. And, again, I think there's every reason to believe that the Cardinals light up the Ravens pass defense on Monday night. The Ravens have not been able to rush the passer since they lost Terrell Suggs. The number 2 pass rusher, Elvis Dumerville, has this groin injury that prevents him from being effective. They lost their free safety, Kendrick Lewis, last week to a knee injury. He will not play this week. Jimmy Smith, their top cornerback, in theory, Pro Football Focus has charted him with the most yards allowed among cornerbacks in the entire NFL this year. Ladarius Webb, theoretically the number 2 corner, he did not play last week. I don't know if he's going to play this week. Their number 3 corner, Will Davis, he had earned that job early in the season. He went on IR 2 weeks ago. I mean, it's a mess, man. And again, these things don't always work out exactly like we expect them to. But if you analyze the matchup, I think the Cardinals smoke them. The one issue to keep an eye on with Arizona is that John Brown was limited in practice on Wednesday with a tight hamstring, and then he did not practice on Friday. So if he is out, you obviously are not going to want him in your lineup, and you need to look at Michael Floyd and Larry Fitzgerald.
Yep, and definitely I could say both those guys are probably going to get a lot of targets because Carson Palmer has been going to those guys very often. He went to Floyd a lot, and to cite some of the numbers I was referring to with regard to that scoring zone passing from Carson Palmer, year to date, prior to that game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, he was 11 touchdowns, no interceptions, and a 117 passer rating from the 25-yard line in to the end zone that he's trying to score on. Against the Steelers, he went 3 of 10 for 2.1 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and he was the NFL's worst passer in terms of passer rating last week. Of all the quarterbacks, he had a 33 passer rating. So I think that's more so an anomaly. I think cite whatever you want to. It's not like he had a bad passing game the rest of the way up the field. He just struggled in that particular spot. So hopefully he'll be able to get that right against the Ravens. Is there anybody, if you think that the Ravens are going to struggle offensively, but they're going to be chasing the Cardinals a lot in this game, is there anybody that you perceive to have any type of playable value for the Baltimore Ravens?
Yeah, Kamar Aiken, who is a player that he's not a great talent by any means. The Ravens didn't want to start him this year. That's why they used a first-round pick on Brashad Perryman. But number 2 wide receivers have had some serious success against the Cardinals because the Cardinals use Patrick Peterson on the opposing number 1. So Kamar Aiken is kind of an under the radar play this week.
It's going to be up to Joe Flacco to get the ball to him, and I think, I think that there's some hope there for Aiken because I think that the Flacco, they're going to try to get Steve Smith the ball, but Flacco generally tries to be, if possible, more cautious about things I've seen on the road. At home, they'll force it. They'll get very aggressive with him passing the ball. He's developed over the last couple of years, so they don't have the same concerns they did as when he was a younger quarterback, where they really were very careful with him. But that said, I think he's going to go where the matchups dictate him to go, and if it's to Aiken, then he's going to try to get a lot of yardage for Kamar Aiken, as you were mentioning.
Yeah, and these are some of the stats. I just looked them up for the number 2 receivers against Arizona. Martavis Bryant, Peterson was on Antonio Brown last week and held him to 24 yards on 8 targets, while Martavis went 6, 137, and 2 touchdowns. Patrick Peterson was on Calvin Johnson the week before that, and Golden Tate saw 18 targets, caught 8 balls. And then the week before that, Patrick Peterson was on Kenny Britt, who had a 0, and Tavon Austin had 6 catches for 96 and 2 touchdowns. So Kamar Aiken is certainly an under-the-radar guy this week, and he's got a shot.
And this is why we love having you on this podcast, because, I mean, what other guy is going to be able to riddle off all of the number 2 wide receivers, not just their year-to-date ranking for the Arizona Cardinals, but list out every single stat, this Money in the Bank. So great advice there. And with that, let's go to the Sunday night game, where we have a couple teams who aren't like the Baltimore Ravens. We've got the Philadelphia Eagles, who are coming on strong, but still question marks with their quarterback position, in my opinion at least. And then we've got the Carolina Panthers, who obviously they're undefeated right now. It's a big game for them. However, they are off of a massive come-from-behind victory over the Seattle Seahawks in Seattle, which is basically like just a star to put on Cam Newton's resume, leading that team in the comeback. We know how much Cam Newton has to offer for this offense to actually be productive as a team, because so much of it is falling on his back. And a lot of times you give a guy a lot of money and he doesn't really live up to it. I think considering the collection of talent that he's being surrounded with, that he is making that investment worth its while, at least through the first 5 games for the Carolina Panthers. But they're going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, who are, like I said, sort of coming along strong. Obviously an easy game that they were able to take care of business against the Saints. And they moved on to the game against the Giants the other week, where it was very difficult initially, and it looked like the Giants might just roll up and down the field on them with a couple of drives, and then things started to get bogged down. They started to get pressure on Eli Manning, disrupt that short passing game, and then their offense started to click because, in large part, the Giants do not have a very good pass rush whatsoever. The Giants' pass rush is one of the worst in the NFL, and as a result, Sam Bradford had a lot of time in the pocket. I don't know if this case is going to be the same thing with the Carolina Panthers. So what's your take on this game Sunday night?
Well, you got Carolina coming off the emotional win in Seattle, where they were talking about it. They were like, everybody's doubting us, and then they get the win. And I think that there is some reason to believe that they might let down a little bit after that. And then Philadelphia's defense is freaking awesome. I mean, they can rush the passer. They have above average secondary play. Their defensive line is incredibly disruptive. They have been consistently one of the best run defenses in the league since Billy Davis took over as defensive coordinator. I was surprised that this game is listed with a 46-point total. And, I mean, I could see it being a 17-14 game. I like the under, and I don't really like any fantasy plays on either side. Sam Bradford has been really prone to turnovers, so I do like Carolina D against Philly. But, maybe some Greg Olsen, but, I don't think Cam has a great game. These teams played in Week 10 last year. Cam took 9 sacks in that game, and he had 4 turnovers. And that's not always an indication of what is going to happen in the next game. I mean, Cam is balling right now, but I do think his numbers are a little deceptive from last week. The Panthers' offense wasn't doing that great until about the fourth quarter, and it was just a great individual effort by Cam and Olsen. But it's not like they whipped the Seahawks all game long. So I don't know. I don't like this game, and maybe I'll be wrong about it. We'll see. But I think that this game ends up being really low scoring, like a defensive slugfest.
Well, if you're wrong about it, then that'll make 2 of us, because I 100% agree with your analysis there. Look, let's face it, just like you mentioned, Cam Newton last week in Seattle, yes, ultimately they did put up a bunch of points, 27 points total, but through 3 quarters, they had 14 total points. It wasn't until the fourth quarter where they rattled off 13 points in that big come from behind victory. Cam Newton had a 63 passer rating during that game. So let's not go and crown him as some sort of genie who was able to figure out the Seattle defense on the road. He got it done when he needed to with some clutch plays, and that's all you can ask for for a quarterback with a lack of talent on the road in a place as difficult to play as Seattle, where they were desperate for a victory. So kudos to him, but it wasn't as if, he ripped through this defense like a knife through butter. On the converse side of that, you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, they have scored a total of 10 points in the first quarter, not the last week, not the last 2 weeks combined, not the last 3 weeks combined, but the whole season. They have scored 10 total points in the first quarter. So they're a team that starts off slow. Carolina, I just mentioned, some of the pass rushing numbers for the Giants versus the Panthers. I have the Giants as rated the dead last team in pass rush efficiency, and the Carolina Panthers rank 13th. So they're going to be able to apply a lot more pressure against Sam Bradford. And the key for Sam Bradford, it seems like this year, when he does have good games, when he can play well, he either needs time in the pocket or he needs a really good run game, preferably both, because without one or the other, he's so-so. Without either of them, he looks miserable. And I definitely think that this is going to be a game where they're going to start off slow. So personally, if you're into betting on these games as well, I'm looking at the under in the first half at 23. I think that's a good angle to attack since both these teams do start off slow. But I tend to agree. It's hard to envision the Philadelphia Eagles on the road really opening it up in the second half and doing a lot of damage against the Panthers defense, which has been pretty stout. The only X factors I will throw into the mix is if you look at the Carolina Panthers schedule, it's been pretty much Cupcake City with the exception of Seattle, but we know Seattle's offense has struggled a little bit. They've actually played the 30th rated average opponent, 30th rated schedule offensively and 30th rated schedule defensively. In other words, there's only been two teams who have had it easier against defenses or easier against offenses. They played the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Houston Texans, the Saints, the Bucks, and then Seattle. So, a lot of the sharper guys were on Carolina to have less of a season than they're currently having, and they've been proving this wrong. Cam Newton has definitely been stepping up here. But once they start playing some better competition, which they really haven't yet, except for that game in Seattle, I think that they will start to struggle, and we will start to see some more chinks in their armor. Their defense may not look quite as tremendous as they've looked so far, and I think that offense may come back to earth a little bit. But I'm not so sure that that this game is a game that Philly runs wild all over them to score enough points to make their offensive players successful. So I kind of agree with you. I think it's a lower scoring game. It's not the wide open style that we saw when Philadelphia ran all over them last season. So definite agreement from me on that one. And let's move on to a couple of other games on Sunday during the day that seem intriguing on the surface that guys might be interested in. So first, let's go ahead and start with this marquee game in the AFC East. We've got the New York Jets, who are 4-1, traveling to the New England Patriots. We've got Todd Bowles with his first opportunity to try to figure out the New England Patriots offense, see what his defense is going to be capable of doing. We've got Darrelle Revis going back to New England. Obviously, this is a bitter rivalry, even without those elements to it, but a lot of familiarity here. The Patriots Pinnacle opened up as a 10-point favorite and have been bet down with people back in the New York Jets rather. The line is now down to 8, I'd say on average, 7.5 at a few spots, but 8.5 or 10 for teaser protection at others. What's your take on this very exciting and pivotal battle for the AFC East? One of these teams certainly looks like it's going to be destined for a wild card spot if they can't win the division. That's likely the Patriots. So if the Jets can pull off a big upset here, maybe they're in the driver's seat, but it'll take a lot to get there. So what's your take on this one?
Yeah, I think the way that the Jets will try to attack the Patriots is with a lot of Chris Ivory. And I think that they can have success doing that. It's going to be in 2 meetings last year against the Patriots, Chris Ivory averaged over 5 yards per carry. The Patriots have been giving up a lot of run game production on defense. You can run on the Patriots, and Ivory has been a machine. The issue is that will the Jets defense be able to stop what has pretty much so far been an unstoppable Patriots offense that has a ton of different dimensions. They've got the big, physically dominant tight end. They've got a dual threat running back. They've got, a power back that can hit you with the power running offense. They've got, little slot receiver types that just get open and move the chains. And they just get first down. Their offense is always on the move. And so will the Jets be able to, force them to punt more? And, the Jets have a good defense for sure. And they'll probably stick Revis on Julian Edelman. I'll be interested to see how they deal with Gronk. Todd Bowles' defense in Arizona were always very susceptible to tight ends because they're very high blitz percentage team. And, when you're sending guys, you leave open the middle of the field. So I think this could be a big game for Gronk. I think it's a game where we'll see Dion Lewis pretty much dominate the Patriots' backfield snaps. Sometimes these games turn into LeGarrette Blount games, but I think this game will be relatively close. And Dion Lewis is like a blitz beating back. I mean, he's a guy you can throw the screen to, check it down to. They're going to want the ball out of Tom Brady's hands quickly, and I don't think they're going to try to attack the Jets with that huge D line, with a power running offense. I mean, the Jets last week were using a 4-man defensive line of Sheldon Richardson, Muhammad Wilkerson, Damon Snacks Harrison, and the rookie Leonard Williams. I mean, all those guys are 300 pounds or more. Actually, Sheldon Richardson, I think, is the lightest at like 290. So, that's not a front that you attack with LeGarrette Blount. I think we're going to see a lot of Dion Lewis. I think that Gronk, after what for him has been a 2-game slump, he went over 100 yards in week 5, but in week 6, I guess it's been kind of a 3-game slump because he didn't really destroy against Dallas either. He did score a touchdown last week, but he's, I think that this game sets up really well for him.
Yeah, this game, first of all, if anybody's looking at, what the Jets allowed last week to the Washington Redskins, and say, oh, wow, they allowed, some points to the Redskins, and we think that the Patriots are going to obviously be able, if the Redskins can do that, look at what the Patriots can do. Well, guess what? The Jets had 9 kickoffs or punts, or there was 1 missed field goal, where then the Redskins took over possession following those kickoffs or punts or the missed field goal. Every single time the Redskins ended up not scoring on any of those plays, but the Jets had 3 turnovers, from their offense, and the Redskins scored on all 3 of those drives. They scored 1 touchdown and 2 field goals, and the only other way that the Redskins got a score was, as we mentioned prior to this discussion here, when you and I were just talking before, where it was a blocked punt in the end zone that they got for a touchdown. So that was the only way that the Redskins were putting up points on the board. And all 3 of those drives, they scored a touchdown. They started at the Jets' 37-yard line. That's how they scored their only other touchdown of the game. So the Jets were very dominant against the Washington Redskins, which isn't saying a ton, but they held them to Alfred Morris to 1.9 yards per carry. Cousins was terrible. And like you kind of mentioned and alluded to, with regard to that the Patriots can be run on, their run defense right now is ranked 29th in efficiency, and the Jets offense is ranked 7th in run efficiency. So there's some definite edges for the Jets, and if you look at who this Patriots team has gone up against, they, on average, the Patriots offense, if we're not going to talk about that side of the ball, have faced, on average, the 27th rated opposing defenses. They've played the 27th rated schedule of opposing defenses. If you riddle them off, the Steelers, we know the Steelers aren't as good as what they've looked the last couple of weeks, in my opinion. They've just been playing some teams that have been struggling offensively. The Bills can't get after the quarterback. The Jaguars, the Cowboys, and the Colts. So those are the defenses that they face. They've yet to face a team like the Jets in terms of that strong defense. And I think one of the underlooked aspects, we all know that the Jets are very good defensively. We know kind of that that's their hallmark. But one underrated aspect, I think, of the Jets is their offense. A lot of people still think of this team as, we're just going to run the ball when we can, and that's what we're going to be relying on for the most part. But the reality is that was the Geno Smith style. When they had Geno Smith, they were like 31st or dead last in terms of one-score games. We're going to run the most. If we're leading, we're going to run the most. I mean, they were way down there. But now with Ryan Fitzpatrick at the helm and these wide receivers who are actually pretty darn good, they're a team that will be passing the football. They pass the ball fairly consistently and fairly frequently. They ranked 17th in the NFL. That was a little bit higher than what it's been the last couple weeks. So, and if they're down, if they're trailing in this game, obviously the Patriots are, like I mentioned, 8-point favorites here. They pass the ball 72% of the time when they're losing. That's sixth most in the NFL. So I think that the Jets are going to be able to put up some points against this Patriots team. What's your take on some of the specific players for the Jets offense and their success potentially against this Patriots defense, aside from Ivory, who you obviously mentioned? Any of the wide receivers that you might be interested in?
Yeah, Ivory would be a very contrarian play. Nobody is talking about him this week, and he's got a good matchup. The concern is the game flow and whether they'll be able to feed him, or will they have to turn to the pass. And, the common thinking and, what I think is that they'll probably have to turn to the pass. And for that reason, I'm on Eric Decker. Liked him a lot last week. And he paid back what he cost, but his game could have been so much bigger because he got tackled at the 1-yard line after this 35-yard catch, which actually set up an Ivory TD, and then he had 2 drop passes. He should have had like 690 and 2 touchdowns, but I think he finished with like 459 and 1 touchdown. So his price actually dropped on FanDuel. And then if you look at the way that the Vegas line sets up for this game, the game flow should be working in the favor of, these Jets wide receivers getting a lot of targets. If you think the Patriots are going to come out and put up some points early, which they are very capable of doing, it doesn't matter how good the defense is, and they put Ryan Fitzpatrick into a situation where he's going to end up throwing the ball 40 times, Eric Decker is going to end up with 12 or 14 targets, and Eric Decker might go off. Eric Decker plays in the slot a lot. I think we'll see the Patriots put their number one cornerback Malcolm Butler on Brandon Marshall. Not that Malcolm Butler will shut down Brandon Marshall, but that's where their number one cornerback will be assigned. And then the Patriots lost their number 2 corner, Terrell Brown, to a foot injury. He went on injured reserve last week. So, they're missing some guys, and if we get a situation where Eric Decker ends up with a bunch of targets, he could crush what he costs on daily fantasy sites.
Yeah, I concur. He's 29th right now on FanDuel at 6,200. He was one spot below Anquan Bolden, who obviously against Seattle played on Thursday. Rashard Matthews of the Dolphins playing against Houston is above him too. So there's definitely some play. Travis Benjamin for the Browns against the Rams. So there's players above him that, like you said, I think he's got some upside there. He's obviously shown and demonstrated a good connection there with Ryan Fitzpatrick. Now, Fitzpatrick seemed to be going after Marshall last week a little bit more, but Decker is there. He makes himself very available. It'll be interesting to see what Bill Belichick tries to cut off of this Jets offense. I will say this, though, my only concern to a slight extent is that Fitzpatrick really historically hasn't shown much success against the Patriots and Bill Belichick. So that's a slight concern. But to give fair and balanced time here, the New York Jets, I mentioned how the Patriots really haven't gone up against good defense. The Jets themselves, that defense has not gone up against very good offenses. Only 7 defenses have played an easier schedule than what the Jets have had to go up against offensively. They've started the season with the Browns, and they went up against the Colts when that offense was struggling. The Eagles, week 3, the Eagles' offense is is obviously one of the better offenses theoretically, but week 3 they were really struggling. The Eagles were able to defeat the Jets, but that was based on, remember that punt return from Sproles that really, catapulted the Eagles there in that game. The Dolphins, right before they fired Joe Philbin, and that offense was very, struggling a lot. And then the Redskins last week. So it's going to be interesting, and a lot of stresses that this New England Patriots offense is going to be able to apply to this defense. I'm fascinated by this game. I think it's going to be, I always look forward to the Jets and Patriots games, but this one I think is going to be really intriguing to see how a new defensive coordinator tries to slow down that offense of the New England Patriots. So a lot of intrigue there. And we move from that one to a game that, let's say, has far less intrigue. Obviously out on the West Coast, it's probably be playing up big as a local rivalry of two divisional teams. But the San Diego Chargers and the Oakland Raiders, San Diego opened as a 5.5 point favorite. That number has been bet down to 3.5 or 4. And the total is basically right where it opened up at. It opened at 47. There's still 47s out there. There's also 46.5s out there. What is your take when the Raiders go to visit the Chargers on Sunday late afternoon?
This game should be fun, I think. I think both teams can score on each other. I think this game has shootout potential. Phillip Rivers has been a machine fantasy-wise this year. And I don't think that's going to change. He leads the NFL in pass attempts. He leads the NFL in passing yards by more than 350. And Melvin Gordon right now is questionable with an ankle, and he hasn't been effective anyways. So I don't think their offense is going to change anytime soon. The way that you attack the Raiders is via the pass. They have the worst secondary in the league. Definitely the worst cornerback play. Their cornerbacks are just absolutely atrocious. David Amerson, guy who they picked up off the street before this or early in the season, he's now starting for them. He was just burnt to a crisp at NC State. Got drafted based on his measurables, burnt to a crisp for the Redskins. They had to cut him. He's the guy that you want to start fantasy wide receivers against. DJ Hayden has been a bust, but they got to keep playing him because they don't have anything better. And then their nickel corner is a guy named Nico Thorpe who just gets torched all the time. So this is a great matchup for Keenan Allen, for Phillip Rivers. The Chargers will get Stevie Johnson back. The question mark is Antonio Gates right now, who it was reported today on Friday night that he has a sprained MCL, and those are usually at least 2-week injuries. Antonio Gates did not practice at all this week, so this is a situation where we're going to need to monitor it into Sunday morning, but. And Antonio Gates was such a popular play in the Thursday FanDuel Bomb, which I play. He was 30% owned, and he may not even play in the game. And if we find out on Sunday morning that he is going to be inactive, all the Ladarius Green, the Raiders have gotten just flamed by tight ends. Crockett Gilmore, Tyler Eifert, Gary Barnage, Martellus Bennett had a monster game against them. Ladarius Green, this could be Ladarius Green week, and he's cheap. He's 2,900 on DraftKings, which is almost a stone minimum, and he's 5,100 on FanDuel, which is one of the cheaper tight ends that makes any sense. So. I think the Chargers are going to score a lot of points. I think they're going to throw the ball a lot, and love Ladarius Green, especially if we learn Sunday morning that Antonio Gates is not going to be out there. And on the other side, I think that Derek Carr is an interesting lower price quarterback play. You could pair him up with Crabtree or Amari Cooper. Crabtree actually has more targets on the season than Amari Cooper that have been delivered by Derek Carr. And he also has a better matchup. Crabtree runs most of his routes against opposing left cornerbacks. He'll be matching up with Brandon Flowers, primarily. Brandon Flowers has given up a bunch of touchdowns so far this year. And then Amari Cooper will get a little bit tougher draw against Jason Verrett, who has been a stud. So kind of a sneaky stack there, Derek Carr and Crabtree. And that opens up a lot if you want to stick in a bunch of studs at other positions.
Yeah, it is extremely interesting if you look at that tight end position and the pricing. I mean, he's almost half of what Gates was going for. Gates was about $5,000 at DraftKings, and Green's $2,900. So definitely a big edge there if Gates is 100% out. One of the upsides that you get is look at the game last week against the Green Bay Packers. This Chargers team, they lost the game by 7 points. They covered the spread. It stayed just under the total, but they had 6 trips into the Packers red zone on the road. They controlled the clock for 38 minutes in Green Bay. And so that's a lot of upside now. You're coming back home and you're hosting the Oakland Raiders defense. You should have high expectations for what this Chargers offense should be able to do. But conversely, if you look at it from the other perspective, the Green Bay Packers only had the ball for 22 minutes, and Aaron Rodgers still averaged 8.2 yards per pass attempt. The run game averaged 7.8 yards per rush against this Chargers defense, and just chewed them right up, and were producing points in bigger chunks against this Chargers defense. So from that perspective, you're going to look at, like you said, look at Carr, look at what's your take on Latavius Murray, the running back there? Do you think that he might stand a good shot in terms of exceeding his price point this week against the Chargers run defense? Is he going to be definitely a guy that you would target in both tournaments and cash games, or would you prefer him mainly in tournaments?
He's a tournament play. He's been benched in each of the Raiders' last 2 games. He's been dealing with a shoulder injury, and I don't know what their deal is. Like, I don't know if they don't think he's that great or something. It's weird. It's really weird. But they benched him in weeks 5 and 6, or in weeks 4 and 5 in the second half, and they went on a bye. And he's got a great matchup. And I mean, I think his physical ability is really, really good. It's just, how committed to him is the team. Will they try to get Roy Halou more mixed in? Will they try to, get Tywan Jones some more carries? Will they use Marcel Reese more? So that's where the risk comes in with Latavius Murray, and also, game flow. If the Chargers at home kind of blow out the Raiders, which is a possibility, or, if the Chargers just play with a lead, we may not see Latavius get that workload. But, the talent is there and the matchup is there, and he is absolutely in play as a tournament option.
Okay, I was thinking the same way, so that makes a lot of sense for tournaments more so than the cash games. And you're absolutely right. I mean, there's going to be opportunities in this game where Oakland is going to need to hand off the ball and should be able to gain some yardage against this run defense. So whichever guy is back there, as long as it's not being split up too much, should be able to see some success when they are getting the ball in their hands, more so than not. Speaking of a running back who is having a lot of success, let's move over to one final game before we switch gears and start talking about position by position here. And let's go right to the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons go on the road to take on the Tennessee Titans. And we're looking at obviously one of the most, I think, running backs who's exceeded most people's expectations so far this year, and that's Devonta Freeman. Right now he's, I think, the second highest priced on DraftKings and the third highest priced running back over on FanDuel. Just he's exploded onto the scene. He's exploded with his touchdown potential, and they've got a big game that they've got to win to keep things going against the Carolina Panthers machine that just seems to keep rolling as well. So they're trying to keep pace in the NFC South. Meanwhile, you've got the Tennessee Titans, who are kind of a desperate team. They're playing at home. They're 1-4 this year. Mariota is not going to be playing. So what's your take on this game?
It's a fun game to analyze. There are a bunch of great fantasy plays on both sides, really. We got the Titans will be without their right cornerback, Parrish Cox, ruled out with a hamstring injury, has been their best corner so far this year, and they will turn to Bleedy Ray Wilson, who is one of the worst cornerbacks in the NFL. And you know, anytime we see Bleedy Ray Wilson in the lineup, you know, we're like, you know, we're ready to go all in.
Bleedy Ray is bleeding dollar signs. When you see him out there, he's bleeding dollar signs.
Yeah, I didn't even know what to say. You know, I was like at a loss for words. You know, when describing the emotion that overcomes me when I see that Bleedy Ray Wilson be out on the field. Yeah, so everybody is on Devonta Freeman, and for good reason. I mean, I have a lot of shares of him as well, but a contrarian way to go in tournaments because everybody is on Devonta, and so I mean he was 49% owned in the Thursday FanDuel bomb, which is just ridiculous for a guy that, you know, to be that highly owned. That means that very few people were on Julio. Julio was 10% owned. And, you know, now you have the opportunity to start Julio against Bleedy Ray Wilson in a game where the Falcons have a pretty darn nice team total. I think it's up around 27 almost, or 26. And, yeah, love Julio as a tournament play. And Devonta Freeman, I think, is a great cash game play still. And then on Tennessee side, you know, this sounds crazy, but I think that Zach Mettenberger on FanDuel is worth a look in cash games because he allows you to get to, you know, Devonta Freeman or you know, you can play whoever you want, Gronk, DeAndre Hopkins, Julio, if you think this game might, you know, become more high scoring than other people think, which I think is a distinct possibility. I mean, I like Mettenberger. I think he's a good player. I think he's a good quarterback. He's aggressive. He will pull the trigger on difficult throws. He's a guy who's playing for a lot because, you know, this is kind of his audition, you know, maybe to be traded and become a starter somewhere else. And I think he could start for 10, 12, maybe even 15 teams in the NFL. I think he's got that kind of arm talent and that kind of, like that aggressive mentality where he's not afraid. He's like a poor man's Flacco, basically. And with no Harry Douglas out there, that significantly, as far as I'm concerned, upgrades Tennessee's receiver core. They will be able to play Kendall Wright at slot receiver, Dorial Green-Beckham, who is an absolute freak on the outside. And then they got Delanie Walker, who's a pretty darn good tight end, had over 150 yards in one of Mettenberger's starts last season. So, and Mettenberger is so cheap. I mean, if he throws 2 touchdowns and for, you know, 220 or more yards, which I think he'll accomplish both of those feats, he is paying off for you big time. And he's also a great tournament player, I think, because I think that, you know, the Falcons can't rush the passer. And I think this is a game where at home, Zach Mettenberger so much to play for, you know, against a defense that can't rush the QB with underrated weapons. I mean, I think a 3 TD game is within his range of possibilities. And I think that, you know, a lot of people have been talking about Landry Jones, who I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. Mettenberger is an NFL caliber starting quarterback, in my opinion, and I think people should take him seriously in DFS.
Well, I think those are some bold words, but I'm not in total disagreement with you. I looked at this quarterback position a lot this past off season prior to the draft when they were looking at, are we going to draft a quarterback? Which guy are we going to take? And what about Mettenberger? What has he been able to do for us? And what I found was that Whisenhunt was not utilizing play action nearly as much as he probably should have to help out his young quarterback when Mettenberger was playing there last year. He was using play action far more with some of the other quarterbacks there in Tennessee. But with Mettenberger, he really wasn't using it all that much. He's been using it a lot more with Mariota this year. So I am a firm believer that if Whisenhunt uses Mettenberger with the way the play action he was using with Mariota, I think Mettenberger will be fine this week. Like you mentioned, some of the metrics bear out that the Falcons pass rush ranks 27th in efficiency, and the past 3 weeks they've only gotten 1 sack a game. Against the Saints, they got 1 sack, and the prior week, the Saints, you might say, okay, well, Drew Brees, yeah, but Drew Brees has been taken advantage of sometimes with defenses sacking him. And then you look at Kirk Cousins the week before that against the Washington Redskins. They only got 1 sack on Kirk Cousins behind a Redskins offensive line that is somewhat iffy. And then you go to the Falcons, played the Texans a couple weeks prior to that. They only got 1 sack on the Texans. So, yeah, definitely some opportunities there if he has time in the pocket. Now, the offensive line hasn't been protecting very well. They're definitely going to need to have shored up some of those issues. But it's possible that they will give him just enough time that he needs to attack some of those wide receivers and make some things happen in the passing game. Now, what's your take on the run game? Obviously, from the running perspective, you know, there's a big edge for the Atlanta Falcons. The Titans actually rank dead last in run defensive efficiency. The Falcons rank second best in the NFL, largely behind Freeman. So I think Freeman is a very solid play. And so, like you're mentioning, do what you might need to do at the quarterback position with a flyer on Mettenberger so that you can move up and grab Freeman. But what is your take on anybody from the Titans run offense remotely a potential this week, or you're going to mainly focus on some of those cheaper wide receivers and quarterbacks?
Yeah, big no on all Titans running backs. I mean, the fact that the Titans really don't have a good running back is another data point in favor of Mettenberger. And, Devonta Freeman is a great fantasy play this week. You know, he's maybe the number 1 overall running back play in fantasy this week. The thing is that everybody knows that. And so, you know, and that's why he's so highly owned. And one way to differentiate, you know, I mean, there is a conceivable scenario where, you know, maybe we see Tevin Coleman worked in a little bit more, or Julio has a huge game, you know. So in a tournament, I think there is some merit to fading him. But yeah, I mean, you know, I'm going to have him in like 70% of my lineups. I mean, the way that the game sets up is beautiful for Devonta Freeman. The matchup, the way that the game is, you know, projected to flow, how good Devonta Freeman has been. You know, he's really game flow proof too. So let's say, you know, Mettenberger starts out hot, and, you know, the Titans go up 14-0 or something like that. Like, Devonta Freeman's still going to be in the game. You know, he's going to be catching passes. We knew that was his strength before the year, before we knew that he was this good of a runner or this good of a fit for Kyle Shanahan's zone scheme. That, you know, he was an excellent passing game back. So, yeah, Devonta Freeman is an awesome fantasy play.
Right, and I agree. And the other data point I think that you would toss out there is what they did with him last week. You know, they really underutilized him last week. The Atlanta Falcons running backs, I believe that there was a point in the game, actually final statistics here. They had Matt Ryan 44 pass attempts against the New Orleans Saints defense, 295 yards, that's 6.7 yards per attempt. He was under pressure constantly throughout that game. He was sacked 5 times, yet they only called 17 run plays. Now, because of the brilliance of Freeman, he still put up a bunch of statistics. But 17 run plays, those run plays gained 8.2 yards per carry. So they were running for 8.2 yards per carry, passing for 6.7, yet Kyle Shanahan was calling, you know, over double the number of pass plays than he was calling run plays when the quarterback is under pressure left and right. The Tennessee Titans are a defense that can apply pass pressure and pass rush to you. So I think that they should come into this game learning from that experience. The good part is they lost that game against the Saints. That should give them pause to consider we need to be more balanced this week. We would look at what the run game was doing for us. We can't let Matt Ryan stand back here, drop back, throw pass after pass after pass, and get his butt kicked. And so I think they will be running the football a lot more than what they were before. But even if they don't, like you said, just because Freeman's so matchup-proof, he's going to still probably produce with whatever limited carries he gets. But obviously it's far better if they actually stay more balanced.
Yep. Can you explain? Because we were watching that game at the same time. I know you tweeted at me. Can you explain why Kyle Shanahan was not running the ball with Freeman in that game?
It's mind-boggling. The only thing I could consider was the score being what it was.
Right.
But
right.
That's the only thing I can.
Still.
Oh, I agree, but still, because when you're looking at he probably wasn't looking at the numbers and the metrics, but when you've got Julio Jones, first of all, Julio is on a short week. He already has a tight hamstring. It was like, is he going to go? Is he not? They say he's going to go, so he's going. And, I mean, it's just not unintelligence from my perspective. There's nothing that I could explain why you would put a quarterback out there who's getting hit a lot with his number one wide receiver not quite 100%, when you've got a run game that is averaging almost 2 yards per carry better than what you're even passing the football for. So I thought that was just a big mistake on their part, and it probably would have resulted in a far more efficient performance from them if they stayed more balanced throughout the course of that game. So it's inexplicable exactly what happened, but I hope that they take a lesson from that. You can guarantee that Dan Quinn, the new head coach there, who is a defensive guy, he wants his offense staying out on that field. He wants that clock ticking. He liked what Marshawn Lynch was able to do up in Seattle with a running back out on that field and keeping his defense rested and fresh on the sideline. So, even though you got Matt Ryan and Julio, you're still going to want to feed that workhorse running back. And fortunately, Atlanta has that, and they can't afford those type of mistakes from a play calling perspective if they're going to hope to do anything, the rest of this season, of course, but looking long term, obviously with their record of 5-1 into the postseason, they need to stay very balanced. And hopefully this was like that one difficult lesson to learn, but hopefully that'll be something they can take forward. So with that said, let's move on to some position-by-position analysis. Obviously, if there's anybody that we kind of covered in detail previously, we'll just kind of toss their names out there. But we're looking at a week for the quarterbacks where there's certainly some guys with some decent point totals out there on the board. But for the most part, there's a lot of point totals, in terms of the NFL total set this week that are in that mid to lower 40s range. There's only a few totals that stand up above that. So let's jump to the quarterbacks right now. What is your take on some of the quarterbacks and a couple guys that may offer some value, and additionally, maybe a guy you definitely want to steer clear of?
Palmer and Rivers will be the two highest owned quarterbacks, and don't think of highest owned as a negative thing. There's a reason that they're high owned, is because they're really good plays. So those are situations to really not overthink. Andrew Luck, I think, is a great play this week. I like how the Colts kind of made their passing offense a little bit more conservative in his first game back. They were really efficient. I don't know what that fake punt or whatever play. I listened to your podcast earlier in the week, and I was laughing at your analysis of it. Not laughing, laughing with. It was hilarious. But Andrew Luck is a great play against a terrible Saints pass D in a game with the highest total of the week. Pair him up with Dante Moncrief, who we can talk about a little bit more when we hit on wide receivers. Mettenberger, talked about him. Derek Carr in a game that I think could shoot out in San Diego. Derek Carr actually had a 4-touchdown game against John Pagano's defense last year. And that was when he was throwing the ball to like Andre Holmes, and now he's got Michael Rivera, and now he's got Amari Cooper and Crabtree. So like Derek Carr, Brady was super low owned in the Thursday bomb, which is really rare for Brady. So, this is an opportunity. I mean, it's a difficult matchup. Again, there's a reason that he was low owned. But, this is an opportunity to get Brady in a spot where he is not high, where he is very low owned, and pair him up with Gronk. And, if he has a 4 TD game and you can, find some good values at your other positions, you could be in a really good spot in a tournament. And I kind of like Jameis Winston this week on DraftKings in the Millie Maker. The last few weeks have been won by cheap quarterbacks. Blake Bortles, I believe it was, in week 5, paired up with Alan Hearns. And then last week it was Stafford and Calvin Johnson. So, if you can kind of hit on a cheap quarterback in a wide receiver stack, and then just come up with a bunch of other really strong plays, you can put yourself in a good position. Mike Evans is a guy who's certainly going to be low owned. He was, I believe, 3% in the Thursday bomb on FanDuel. Jameis was 1.5%, or no, 1%. He's 1%. So nobody's on that stack in a pretty good matchup. I mean, first of all, the Bucs are coming off a bye, and the Redskins, they have overachieved on defense for the most part, to this point in the season, but their personnel has never been very strong in terms of their pass defense. And they're going to be without both their starting cornerbacks again. And we started to see it kind of crumble, beginning last week with Decker Marshall and Ryan Fitzpatrick was a top 5 quarterback on the week. So kind of like Jameis as a contrarian, cheap quarterback this week.
I won't deny that going up against the Redskins lately has been definitely a boon for players of all positions, and particularly against those cornerbacks. I 100% agree with you there. A guy that we haven't talked about much, a game that we haven't talked about much, is the New York Giants against the Dallas Cowboys. It's obviously a massively important game for the NFC East. Both these teams are flirting right around 500, and a win here by either team really not only helps their playoff possibilities, but just decimates their opponents. So that's going to be a massive game. What is your take on Eli Manning? I see he's the 5th highest priced. I believe it's on DraftKings that he's the 5th highest priced. The Dallas Cowboys now, their defense and their pass rush is coming around a little bit with obviously Hardy in the mix and being able to get to Tom Brady a little bit last week. Obviously, that didn't help on the scoreboard, but that pressure was getting there a little bit. And we know, conversely, on the offensive side of the ball, Dallas Cowboys are probably going to try to milk that clock. They're going to try to, keep Castle out of trouble on the road. They're going to try to run the ball. It's a little bit more difficult to run the ball against the Giants' defense, so they might be out on the field even longer, not getting huge chunk plays. So that's going to keep Eli Manning on the sidelines. What's your take on Eli Manning? Is he going to live up to this, or do you think he's overpriced this week?
No, I think that Eli Manning really is in play in DFS every single week. There are reasons why I'm not on him. It's that, I didn't like the way that Ruben Randall looked health-wise on Monday night. Now they're on a short week. Odell Beckham was unable to practice this entire week, and he's going to play, but that's still a little bit of a concern. Greg Hardy, Randy Gregory, Rolando McClain in there for Dallas. Not as great of a matchup as it looks. I'm human. I get caught up sometimes in recency bias, and Eli Manning kind of let me down on Monday night when I thought he was going to have a pretty good game against Philly, and so that kind of affected my personal thought process on him this week. But he's been really good most of the year. He was on fire going into that Philly game, and you certainly can make the argument that coming off that road loss, like the Giants could come back home and really put up some points. Like that shouldn't surprise anyone if that happens.
He was on fire at the beginning of that game too. I mean, that first drive up there, he punched a touchdown in, got all the way down there until that ball got ripped out of Larry Donnell's hands there after the completed pass, which is obviously ruled an interception, but it really was a strip fumble almost, not necessarily on Eli Manning at all. After that, it became more difficult. The pressure was getting to him a little bit, but I was curious to hear your thoughts on his matchup there. So let's look at some of the running backs. We obviously talked about, I think, one of the guys that we both think has a ton of upside this week, even though his price point is high. That's Devonta Freeman. What's your take? Obviously, always curious to know about some of these really high-priced guys. You've got Le'Veon Bell and Adrian Peterson are basically like the other two guys in that top three. Do you think both of those guys live up to that price point this week and are worth it, or would you be taking some guys that are a couple notches below to allow you to do some things at other positions?
Yeah, so because everyone is on Freeman and Gurley this week, Le'Veon Bell and Adrian Peterson are very low owned. In the Thursday bomb, I think that they were both under 5%, which is just ridiculous for guys of their talent level. Recency bias certainly is bringing down the ownership percentage of Adrian Peterson he let a lot of people down last week. Yeah. Le'Veon was 7% on Thursday, and Adrian Peterson was 4%. Peterson is a great way to differentiate in tournaments. He shredded the Lions in week 2, had I think almost 200 total yards. Finished with no TDs because he got vultured by Zach Line, the Vikings fullback. He got Teddy Bridgewater had a 1-yard rushing touchdown. Kyle Rudolph scored a 5-yard touchdown. So kind of just a lot of bad luck there. But Peterson, he could go nuts. Le'Veon Bell does not have an ideal matchup against Kansas City, and that's one of the reasons why he's so low owned. But the workload is going to be there for him. He has at least 24 touches in each of his games so far this year, despite missing the first 2 games of the season on suspension. Leads the NFL in 20-plus yard runs, so he's got that big playability, and he's going to get the ball a lot, and he's low owned, and those things make him a great tournament play this week.
Good, very good point in terms of that ownership percentage. If those guys can exceed their price point and they're not really well owned, then that's obviously a big boon, especially because players kind of like favorites in the NFL. The average guy is drawn to betting on the favorites. The average guy is probably drawn towards, hey, this guy's higher price, so he must be a better play this week. And when they go and look at guys that are a little bit lower priced and ignore those guys at the top, certainly that's a good strategy to look at in some of those tournaments where you're trying to compete against those guys and thousands of others. Any other running backs that you think? We obviously mentioned a number of them, but is there anybody that we left out that you want to mention?
Yeah, Todd Gurley is an awesome play against the Browns in a game where the Rams are coming off their bye. They're favored by nearly a touchdown. I think that Danny Woodhead is kind of sneaky with the Gates injury. Could lead to a couple more targets for him. Melvin Gordon listed as questionable. This is an offense that is very committed to throwing the football, and Woodhead is their best receiving back. Primarily those guys. I think Matt Jones a little bit interesting this week. He's pretty cheap, and the Redskins are back home. They're favored at home. Always like running backs that are at home and favored. And with no Chris Thompson, the Redskins passing down back, Matt Jones will take over those duties. So he's going to lose some work to Alfred Morris, but he is going to be more game flow proof because he'll be in the game if the Redskins fall behind. And then in the game that he played before he missed the last game with a toe injury in Week 5, Matt Jones dominated the red zone work. So he's going to have passing down work added to his repertoire, and I think he's the favorite for red zone carries, and he's cheap, and no one is going to be on him this week. I think he's a pretty good play.
Excellent. Cool. That's great info there. We always like the diamonds in the rough, so to speak. Move along to the wide receiver position. Got a number of guys that are hitting this higher price point. Of course, you got this trio of Odell Beckham, Julio Jones, and DeAndre Hopkins, who are kind of up there in their own stratosphere. And then you've got another group that's a little bit more closely bunched together. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the bigger plays that you think are going to have success, and then let's work our way down to the one punt wide receiver that you think might be able to be, whether he's low owned or just low priced, and you think he's going to be able to really exceed with his upside this week.
Yeah, we talked about Decker, Mike Evans coming off the bye for Tampa Bay in a great matchup. Dante Moncrief, who has as many targets as T.Y. Hilton from Andrew Luck this season, has scored in all 4 of Andrew Luck's starts. That's Moncrief, and he'll have a really good matchup this week on the field. The Saints' right cornerback, which is where Moncrief runs most of his routes, is Brandon Browner, who has the worst grade among cornerbacks at Pro Football Focus. We will see Delvin Breaux take on T.Y. Hilton, and Delvin Breaux has been really strong this year. He's an incredible athlete. The Colts got him out of the CFL, and I mean he is like almost already a legit shutdown corner. So the game really sets up well for Moncrief in that respect. Huge total on the game. Love that for wide receivers. It could be an up and down type game. If there's no John Brown, and we may not find that out for a while here, but that makes Michael Floyd a great play, and he's my favorite punt play of the week. He was my favorite punt play of the week last week as well, but his price didn't change at all on FanDuel, and I know that on DraftKings too he's still very, very cheap, and he saw 3 red zone targets. He had 5 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown. He played 75% of the snap, which is a season high for him so far, and he saw 8 targets, which is another season high. So he is my favorite punt play wide receiver of the week. Again, still just above minimum. And I also like Crabtree a lot. Talked about him earlier. And Fitzgerald is still a guy who's underpriced. Larry Fitz, he's the number 2 overall fantasy wide receiver, and he's priced like a wide receiver 2, which means like 14 to 18 range on FanDuel. So, and he's got this awesome matchup against the Ravens. So those are the wide receivers that I'm looking at this week.
It is pretty amazing when you look at Michael Floyd. I mean, he's down at the 68th, priced wide receiver on FanDuel, and his price point over at DraftKings is down at 56. So yeah, I mean their minimum is just right above that $3,000 mark, $3,200. It is pretty amazing because obviously having watched that game very closely and then looking at the statistics afterwards, it was obvious how much Carson Palmer was utilizing his familiarity with Floyd from last year. It just kind of came right back to him, kind of like Phillip Rivers with Gates. Phillip Rivers gets Gates back, and all of a sudden he's throwing all these passes to Gates like he never left, and that's kind of what was happening. There was no real ease in or transition period there, so I think that's a really solid play with a lot of upside, especially considering that price. I think you got a good one there. Real quick, just touching on a guy who we haven't touched on much, but there may not be that much reason to touch on him. But Travis Benjamin is a really unique candidate, wide receiver from Cleveland, playing the St. Louis Rams. He's sneaky in terms of his stature. He's sneaky in terms of how he'll put up points in bunches on occasion. Do you have any take on him this week in terms of this matchup? Are you steering clear of him because of that Rams front seven and their ability to pressure the Cleveland Browns at the point of attack to, prevent some of those bigger downfield passes, or do you think he could be a possible play?
No, I do like him. I put him in a tournament lineup on Thursday. He is priced right around John Brown, who most people are on. He's priced right around Jordan Matthews. His target totals over the last 4 games for the Browns are 10, 10, 12, and 13. That's a ton of targets, man.
Yeah.
Catching a lot of balls. He's a guy who has progressed over the course of the season from a rotational deep threat to the Browns' clear-cut number 1 wide receiver. And, that defense, the Rams defense, it's good, but it's also prone to coverage busts. And you talked about that a little bit earlier. So I do like Travis Benjamin this week. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, and that game really, it comes down to when we're talking about the coverage bust and potential for big plays, Cleveland ranks 4th in the NFL in terms of explosive pass play offense, and the Rams rank 3rd defensively at preventing it so far this season. So it's really a matchup of strengths. Cleveland has a decent above-average offensive line that if they can go up against that stout defensive line from the Rams, who are off of a bye, rested up, and if they can get any type of protection at all, then McCown's going to go deep. He's going to try to take some shots, and they're going to try to hit Benjamin on those shots. So those are staggering target numbers that you read off there, though. Very impressive from a player like him, a team that's wanting to target a guy like him. Kind of tells you a little bit how desperate they are. It's basically Barnage and Benjamin, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a good feel at this point for where the ball is going to go in their offense.
Absolutely. So with that said, let's transition right to the tight ends. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the tight ends this week. Obviously, the Antonio Gates, as you mentioned earlier, he is very high owned. He's very high priced. I mean, he's obviously not the Rob Gronkowski level, but he's right there with some of the other guys like the Jimmy Grahams, the Travis Kelce's, the Gary Barnages. And if he's not out there, that obviously frees up a big opening for his replacement. But go ahead and touch on some of the tight ends that you like this week.
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered them all. We did not talk. We talked about Gronk. We talked about Delanie Walker a little bit. He's kind of sneaky if you want to throw him in there with Mettenberger. Again, Walker had a 150-yard game last year with Mettenberger as a starter. If no Gates, Ladarius Green becomes, probably a top 5 fantasy tight end option against the Raiders. Travis Kelce is a guy who looked really interesting on Thursday, but then Ed Werder reported that Macklin was expected to play still. And so, Kelce's probably not going to see the 11 targets that he might have seen had Macklin been out. And Macklin returned to practice today. He's listed as questionable. He's coming back from a concussion, but I think signs are pretty good that he's going to play. So, and then Greg Olsen, we talked about him a little bit more. He was a guy that I was not on at all based on his last week against Seattle. Based on his historical numbers against Seattle, they had played a lot in prior weeks or in prior seasons, in recent seasons, and he had never topped 60 yards or scored a touchdown against Seattle. And, I mean, he blew that trend right open. So, that's a lesson to, I'm always trying to learn, and I try to learn from my mistakes. Like, don't hang on to one piece of data to allow yourself to make decisions. We should be looking at as many factors as we possibly can that we believe are predictive. And right now, Greg Olsen leads the NFL and leads all NFL tight ends in targets per game. And, he's going to be a good fantasy player every week because the Panthers don't have wide receivers.
Right, they don't. And speaking of a team that's actually struggling with wide receivers, I wanted to throw this out. Probably only a tournament stack, and I don't think you're going to like it because I don't think you're high on the quarterback involved, but a very dirt cheap quarterback and a tight end that he's targeting a ton is this game over in London, where you've got E.J. Manuel going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars defense. Now, a lot of people are down on E.J. Manuel, and I totally commiserate with you from that perspective. However, what I will say is, if those opinions are formulated based on what he did last season, that offense last season was run by Doug Marrone, who basically ran it into the ground, did not know what the hell he was doing there. I feel much more confident with their offensive coordinator. They're going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars team who was just torn apart by Brian Hoyer for 8 yards per attempt at a 119 rating, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. In the prior game, that same defense was torn apart by the Buccaneers, 121 passer rating from Winston with 9.8 yards per attempt. Now, against the Bengals defense last week, Bengals have a pretty good defense, as we know, and the Bengals have a pretty good offense, so they were able to control that game flow a little bit more. But E.J. Manuel is still 67% completions. Now, he threw a bad interception, but he was 100% in the red zone in terms of when they were trying to score. They led him into the red zone twice. He came away with 2 touchdowns down there. I'm thinking that he's shaking off a little bit of rust in that first game back. He'll probably have a little bit better hope this week, as we kind of alluded to. He's playing for his job. He's playing to impress other teams. And on early down passing last week, first or second down, 73% completions, 103 passer rating on first or second down passing. And no quarterback was better than him inside the opponent's 25-yard line, 155 passer rating. He went to Charles Clay a lot. And the Jaguars, as we mentioned, they're a team that can be passed on. My only concern here, and I'm really happy that LaShawn McCoy is back and looks healthy. I mean, he showed some burst against Cincinnati Bengals. He still had his ability to cut. His quickness was there. So I think he'll travel well over to London for this game. My only concern is that offensive line on the right side. They're dealing with some injured players there, and they're going to need some replacement players to fill in for them. So, it's definitely a high risk, but potentially high reward if those guys do well together, because he was targeting Charles Clay. It seemed like, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it seemed like a fair amount during that game. Yeah,
in the absence of with the Bills' wide receiver injuries, the Bills have they're trying to force the ball to Charles Clay. They believe in Charles Clay. They're paying him like an elite tight end in the NFL, and he has been certainly a huge part of their passing game. So I like it.
So that's one for you guys. So very, very high risk. But if it works out, that's definitely. You're talking about low-owned stacks. That's probably one of them going to be up there this week in terms of one of the least owned stacks that people. Besides, that means that people out on the West Coast would have to get up at 6:30 a.m. to watch this game on Yahoo of all things. So it's a lot of effort just to be able to watch you guys. So that's even more reason why nobody's going to want to throw them in there, because a lot of you guys like to watch the players that they're starting, which I don't blame them for. So moving along to the defenses before we wrap it up here, anybody out there defensively who you think maybe Arizona or some of these other more marquee defenses that you think could really stand a good shot this week?
Yeah, I like Arizona a lot. They're really expensive though. So you got to find the space for them for sure. The Rams as a correlation play plus Gurley, that I think it's chalky. I mean, a lot of people are going to be on that correlation play, but it's worth it. The plays check a lot of boxes. In terms of the matchup for Gurley and Josh McCown's proneness to interceptions and how good the Rams defense is personnel-wise, and the Rams coming off the bye at home, significant favorites, lots of reasons to like the Rams D. I think that the Redskins defense is in play as well. I know I spoke earlier how I like Winston and Mike Evans, and I do, but the Redskins also check boxes. I mean, they're at home. They're coming off, kind of an embarrassing loss. I think that they've shown some mental fortitude this season, and they could bounce back. I mean, look, Jameis Winston, as much as I kind of like him as a high risk tournament option with Mike Evans, he's thrown a lot of interceptions this year, and he's not real mobile in the pocket, and he could get in situations where he takes a lot of sacks. So kind of like the Redskins D, really like the Patriots D. If the Patriots put Fitzpatrick down, and the Jets are playing from behind, you mentioned that earlier, they're throwing over 70% of the time when they're behind, and Fitzpatrick is a guy who will throw turnovers. He will give you chances to make plays on the ball, and the Patriots have a bunch of sacks this year as well. And then I also like the Bills' defense. The Bills have had trouble with quarterbacks that get rid of the football quickly. Tom Brady, Eli Manning, Andy Dalton, but they've also played well against quarterbacks that hold the ball longer, like Andrew Luck, Marcus Mariota, and Blake Bortles has a tendency to hold on to the ball and wait for things to kind of come open. And I would say the Bills' defense has been a disappointment this year, but I also think that's a function of some of the quarterbacks that they've played, and I think that the way that Blake Bortles plays into the hands of the Bills' defense, and they're going to get after him.
And you're exactly right, because the Buffalo Bills have actually gone up against the fourth most difficult schedule of opposing offenses, and you just riddled off a number of those quarterbacks that they've had to face. But the offenses that they've gone up against have been pretty good, and they've been against more, somewhat, I guess you could say, veteran quarterbacks, obviously aside from the Tennessee Titans, but you're talking about Andy Dalton, Eli Manning, Ryan Tannehill, Andrew Luck, and Tom Brady, of course. So those are all quarterbacks that have a lot of experience there. When they did go up against the Tennessee Titans, they held them down to 13 points. So it's a chance and opportunity for that defense to get back on track. And the other thing that you could throw into that mix is going over to London. If you can get out to some type of a lead in London and really kind of set the tone, then sometimes you got guys on the other team who are just mentally checking out and waiting for their flight, get out of town and come back home and enjoy their bye week. So if you can get a team down early, which if the Buffalo Bills are able to do that against an offense that's obviously a little step or two below what they were accustomed to facing most recently, then there's a perfect opportunity for them to be able to exert some of that frustration, everything they have to talk about to the media. Why isn't the defense working? What's going on with Rich Ryan? Why aren't you guys executing it well enough? Get all that frustration out on the field over there in London. I think that could potentially be a pretty decent spot. So we'll have to see how that one goes. But you're right, that could be an interesting spot for the Bills. With that said, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I don't know if you have any parting shots to leave anybody with this week, but we obviously once again covered a ton of information on this podcast, so we appreciate all the time that you put into this for us, and I know all the listeners are appreciating it as well. I've gotten tons of emails about how much they're enjoying the podcast and the great information, the analytics that we're tossing out here, and the level of detail that we go incorporating some of the sports betting elements into a lot of the daily fantasy and injury related stuff. So with that said, go ahead and give everybody your Twitter handle again. Give them the website again. They got to go check out these articles every Thursday, your matchups articles. And if there's anything that you want to leave them with, any tidbit, any piece of information, advice, a final player, anything like that at all, go ahead and toss that in there as well.
You can check me out at Evan Silva, and my article on Thursday is called Matchups. It's on rotoworld.com. Don't be afraid of the cheap quarterbacks. I know it feels a lot better to play Tom Brady, to play Carson Palmer, but don't be afraid of the cheap quarterbacks. That's who's winning these big tournaments. I also think that they're very, very viable in cash games. Quarterbacks have higher floors. They're generally going to throw for around 200 yards. They're generally going to have at least one touchdown. And then if you get in a situation where you have a cheap quarterback where you were only expecting to throw one touchdown and 200 yards to return value on what you paid for him under the salary cap, if you get into a situation where he has a game like Blake Bortles did 2 weeks ago with 4 touchdowns, you're at a significant advantage. So don't be afraid of the cheap QBs.
I definitely agree. I mean, there's guys in fantasy leagues that are, regular leagues out there who were picking up Bortles and starting Bortles and producing a lot of points with Bortles, and they just were able to get this guy off the waiver wire or, so you can imagine if those guys are capable of doing that in daily fantasy, what that means to you when you can, week in and week out, you're getting a guy who's low owned and who's very cheap, where most of the opponents that you're playing against are spending a lot more money, and Bortles is outproducing even those quarterbacks. That's really going to give you a big edge. Like you mentioned, now there are going to be weeks where the guy's not going to live up to the hype, so to speak, and maybe it's not this week for Bortles necessarily, but there are a number of quarterbacks that you and I discussed earlier that are pretty low owned, probably pretty good opportunity with upside that they could produce something to send some of these guys some good winnings on their tournament lineup. So always great information, Evan. We appreciate it very much, guys. Check him out at Evan Silva on Twitter. And until next week, good luck with all your games this weekend, Evan.
Same to you, man.
This is gonna be a fun ride. This is gonna be a fun ride.
Everybody one clap.
I'm gonna play when I wanna play, do what I wanna do. I'm gonna say what I wanna say. Did I say anything stupid today? My role is to take the ball deep, take the top off the defense. Take the ball deep, take the top off the defense.
If I can't get to it, nobody can get to it.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie. Everybody one clap, one clap, one clap, one clap.